screenings end up with beer bottles sitting in the front, so that's kind of a good sign. So I just wanted to say first, there was a small glitch in our hard drive or something, and there was about a good minute and a half that just kind of evaporated from the film. If I could just explain it just a little bit, just because it's kind of a cool moment, just for those who were interested, particularly in Jodorowsky's vision. He talks about how he wanted to end his film, and for those who know or those who don't know, the Dune book series continues on for many, many novels, and Frank Herbert wrote a bunch, and then he passed away, and his son continued to write them, and so to this day there are still more and more Dune novels. But Jodorowsky wanted to end his film. He didn't want a Dune Part 2 or Dune Part 3 or any of that. So at the very end, the last scene, the main character, the boy, played by his son, gets his throat slit. And so he dies, kind of. So he dies, but he basically lives on through every other character, because in every other character starts to speak in his voice. And that's kind of, in a weird way, it's almost like Jodorowsky was foreshadowing to me what was going to happen with his film, because just like Bronte says, he says that the film is like Paul. The film's throat was cut, but you can still see the influence. It still lives on to this day. So that tiny little minute and a half or so seemed to be lost in the Matrix or something. So.
I mean, that just kind of shows just in a minute or a minute and a half how much information was in there. I mean, there must have been so much other stuff that you couldn't include in the film, and I assume that Jodorowsky was, well, he seems like he could probably talk forever. Was there any stuff in there that you couldn't include just for time that you were kind of paying to leave out?
Oh, I mean, there's so much. I mean, this story, his story continued for a good, 2.5, 3 years. So you can imagine how many amazing people came in and out. But we're limited in the documentary. We're limited to, we kept it to 90 minutes. Well, usually 90 minutes. Tonight, 88 minutes and something. But usually it's 90 minutes. So there's so many amazing stories and amazing people. But we kind of just tried to keep that train moving down those tracks and just kind of keeping the core things. But, I'm sure the DVD will have, 2-3 discs of the same stuff. I can only imagine.
Can you talk a little bit about how you first kind of encountered him? I mean, how did you approach him with the idea for this film, and how responsive was he in the first instance?
He was actually quite responsive. I had, he says in the film when he's looking for Mobius, he says, there was no internet, but, I was lucky to have had the internet, and I searched him using the internet, using the magic of Google, and I found an agent that he has in Spain. An agent that he has for acting. I didn't even know that he really acted in anyone else's films aside from his own, but apparently he does, and he has his agent that you can contact. So I did, and I sent her an email, and she, I guess, forwarded the email to him, because a few months later, I woke up one morning and went to my email, and there was an unread message from Alejandro Jodorowsky, which was terrifying. I mean, in a certain way, you're getting this email from this, he's not even a person, he's like a mythical creature. So I think, if I remember correctly, I didn't even open it for a good week. I think I just left it closed, because terrified, because if he, it could have just been N-O, period. And that would have been horrible, that would have destroyed my dreams. So I wanted to keep my dreams alive for another week. And at the end of that week, I opened up the email, and it was a very quick message from him, and he said, I hear you're looking for me. I live in Paris, and if you want to speak with me about telling the story of Dune, you need to come to Paris, and we need to meet face to face. So I made a ticket, and I went right to Paris, and met with him, and it kind of just started to flow from there. Once we got him involved, and we got the rest of the pieces of the puzzle started to pretty much easily come together. Because I think even to this day, all the participants in his film, Chris Voss and H.R. Giger and Michel Sardou, and all these people, I think they still feel very strongly. They still have very strong feelings for Jodorowsky, and they still credit him with embettering their life, I guess, to an extent, and helping them have different careers and furthering their careers in certain ways. So once once I had him, then it was very easy to reach out to the rest of the participants. And once I could say, yes, I have Alejandro Jodorowsky, it was pretty easy to get the rest of them.
I mean, was there anyone that you tried to get in touch with that you couldn't, that didn't want to be part of the film? I wonder if you ever thought about including David Lynch in the film to talk about his version of the film.
Well, that would be kind of bad. I mean, if we included him, how could I include him and then, and then allow Jodorowsky to say what he thinks? That would be so horrible. That would be so horrible. But I really, we tried to pretend for the most part. I tried to get, not pretend, but I tried to get in the mind frame that, make it all pre-David Lynch's Dune. I purposely stayed away from Lynch's Dune during the making of this. I didn't want to be influenced by that. I didn't want to think of Sting. I wanted to think of Mick Jagger. I didn't want to think of Kyle MacLachlan. I wanted to think of Brontis Jodorowsky. I didn't want to think of Toto. I wanted to think of Pink Floyd. So I kind of stayed away from that. But really, there was nobody else that we tried to include. It would have been great to have had Mobius and Dan O'Bannon, but they, of course, passed away. So they weren't able to, of course, be part of the project. But everyone else, I feel like we got the real core people, and it really seemed to work out pretty well. I'm also not a big fan of documentaries where it's 90 minutes and 90 people. You can't really follow who's speaking, and each person comes on for 30 seconds, and I get confused anyway. So I want to keep it to just a small crew of the core participants and some worthy outside voices, and kind of keep it simple.
And absolutely, it's so much more than just a talking heads documentary. I mean, the way that you incorporate the animation and the kind of storyboards that he was working on is really inventive and clever. What was your kind of visual approach when you set out to make the film?
I think one of the things we really wanted to do was not to make his vision our vision, but just to share his vision. So when you take the Mobius storyboards, for example, what you want to do is you don't want to create an animated film out of them. We just want to breathe a little bit of life to kind of elevate them a little bit from the page, so that the viewer sees the vision, sees Jodorowsky's vision, sees what he wants to do, and then hopefully the viewer's imagination goes further and connects the rest of those dots, so you can picture what was really happening. And the same thing with with Chris Foss's paintings. We wanted to just add a little bit of life, onto the big screen. So we would kind of just add some texture to it, add some stuff like that. But we really wanted to keep Jodorowsky's and HRD and Chris Foss and Mobius's vision pure and not tainted with how we see the world in 2000 and whatever.
Does anyone have any questions for Frank? Yeah, sure. There's just a microphone just coming down, so just one second.
Oh, good. Frank, thanks so much for that tremendously inspiring film. This has been like a bit of a folk tale that I've heard about for a long time. It was great to see it crystallise like that, so that was awesome. My question is, a couple of years ago, the publishing organisation Taschen put out a massive book about Napoleon, the Kubrick film. I was just wondering if there have been any waves about putting out that book.
Wish I had a prize from you. That everybody at every screening, that is the question that always comes up. Everybody wants that book. I don't know. I don't know what's happening with that. I know that if they did print the book, I'd be the first guy in line. I would love to.
No, I'll be the first.
We'd be side by side. I would love to see it. I don't know if it'll happen. I don't know what the legalities are of it.
Hopefully this movie will stimulate that interest, hopefully.
That would be great. That'd be fantastic.
What kind of impression did you get of what the effect of all that training was on his son?
It's really interesting. When I did have a lot of conversations with his son, with Brontis, about that, and one of the things that he pointed out, because he is an actor to this day. He mostly does theater, but he does some film. He's starring in his father's new film, which just came out in France a few weeks ago, and hopefully will be here shortly. But he says that all that training, it really helped him with the precision of his body. So, for example, he was, I saw him once do a play in French, a language which I do not speak. But I can still enjoy and I can still understand what was really going on, because you can see he was so precise in all of his movements, not robotic, but he knows his body so well from all that training. You can really see that in his performances. You can see that in Jodorowsky's new film. You can see it on the stage. There's a real tangibility that he possesses from all that. And he continued the training. After Dune collapsed, he still trained with Vigneault for a couple of years. So go figure. I don't know if that's Stockholm syndrome or.
Are there another question? Jet, down here at the front.
Thank you. What did the idea to involve Richard Stanley and Nicholas Fanning Craft came from? They're fantastic directors, but I wonder if they were in some way engaged in Jodorowsky's idea. So.
Refn is a huge fan of Jodorowsky, and Jodorowsky is a huge fan of Refn. If you look at Drive has Jodorowsky listed in the special thanks. If you look at Refn's latest film, Only God Forgives, it's dedicated to Jodorowsky. It's the first credit at the end of the film. Before Refn's name, before anything, it's for my friend Alejandro Jodorowsky. So they have a very close relationship with each other, and Jodorowsky has basically christened Refn as his spiritual filmmaking godson, and calls him the greatest living director today. So it was really, and being a big fan of Refn, I thought it would be interesting to have that voice in there, someone who knows Jodorowsky very well on this very different level, kind of speaking about it. And Richard Stanley, I think, was an interesting choice for us, because he could kind of speak from the viewpoint almost of Jodorowsky, because their careers mirror one another's to a certain degree. Jodorowsky started out doing a couple of small films. He did, most notably El Topo and then Holy Mountain, and then he reached for the stars and doing this adaptation which didn't work out as planned. And the same thing with Richard Stanley. He did Hardware, he did Dust Devil, these two small, independent South African films. That he goes for the gold and tries to do his adaptation of Island of Dr. Moreau, and it really goes horribly wrong. And he was, for those who don't know, he spent years and years developing his big screen adaptation of this H.G. Wells story, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and after, I think, 2 days of filming, the studio came in and fired him and replaced him with John Frankenheimer. And Richard Stanley ran off into the woods and put on an animal costume and became an extra in his own film without anybody knowing, and just to kind of spy on Frankenheimer to see how is he going to destroy my movie. So he kind of has that, Jodorowsky can be very spiritual and say, oh yes, Dune didn't work out, but it's still okay. And I think it's a bigger wound, I think, for Richard Stanley. So not only is he a fan of Jodorowsky's, obviously, but I think he can really speak to that pain. So that's why we'd like to include him.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, right at the back.
Another question I suspect has been asked before. Jodorowsky in the end mentioned the possibility of an animation of Dune. Looking at it, I could see that happening. I could particularly see a Japanese studio perhaps doing it. Do you know if there's, if there's any interest in that, or do you think this documentary could maybe spark some interest?
Well, that's kind of the goal. I mean, that's certainly a reason that we included that line. Out of the hours and hours and hours of footage of Jodorowsky, we made sure to keep that in line in there. Made sure to keep that line in there to maybe set a little bait and see who was going to spark to that idea and who would approach him. And last time I saw Jodorowsky was at a film festival in Munich, and he said that a director after Cannes, a director did approach him to do the animated version, and I'm blanking on the director's name. He's a French director. He directed the big screen adaptation of Blueberry, of Mobius's comic series, Blueberry. So I'm completely blanking on his name, but that's, if we look up on IMDb, that is the guy that has approached Jodorowsky. Will that happen? Will that happen with him? Will that happen with somebody else? Can it happen? I don't know, but it would be fantastic, I think. I'd love to see the book come out, I'd love to see the animated film. I'd love to see it all.
Yeah, there's a question over in the corner.
I was just thinking, was there any, did you ever talk to any of the studios to see if anyone who sat in the pitch wanted to comment? Because watching that, I would probably do anything that man asked. As obviously Orson Welles and Mick Jagger and everyone else found that, 5 minutes in a room, you'll do whatever he says. It just would have been interesting if he was in the pitch. How the hell, well, it's Hollywood studios, but how the hell they didn't just start throwing checks at him, because he seems an incredibly infectious character.
I can understand why they were not throwing their checks at him. I think, as much as I love him, as much as I would love to see this, I understand. Yeah, $15 million at the time, as well, was massive, massive. And it would take that to make Dune. I mean, I know when Lynch made his, I think his came in at 50, I think, and it was the largest movie of its time, I believe. So I could see in the pre-Star Wars world, I could see studios saying no way. But we did, we did so much research and tried to find, who would be the executive at, MGM, who would be the executive at Paramount, who would be the executive at Warner Brothers that they met with, and we could never find anything. We went through film libraries at USC where they have basically all the memos and all the letters sent out by all these guys, and we couldn't ever find anything. So I don't know if whoever that was would want to. Oh, it'd be interesting. I'd love to see. I could just. What would it be in the film? You'd just be sitting there going, "Of course I said no. Look at this. You seen Holy Matthew? Have you seen El Topo? But that's in our interviews with Richard Stanley, he has this really interesting point where he says that maybe Dune was a case of TMI. It was a case of too much information. That when you present everything to these people, here's the book, here's 3,000 images, scenes 1 through 90, here's every shot, every costume. The more information you give, the more there is for them to say no to. While we were speaking with Richard, he said, I've never been turned down when I just give an idea, when I just give a pitch. But when there's too much information, the dress should be red and not green, it should be this and not that, it just gives people too much power to say no. Well, if you just kind of go in with just a big idea, maybe that's a little bit easier to happen.
I think there was another question over here.
Hi. So was your own reasoning behind yourself doing the film, did that emanate more from an interest in Jodorowsky or from Frank Herbert's Dune?
I came from the Jodorowsky side of things. I was familiar with his films before you could get his films. For years, his films were completely unavailable. He was in a battle for 20 or 30 years with a producer named Alan Klein, who was the Beatles and the Rolling Stones manager, and who basically bankrolled, distributed El Topo, got it out there, bankrolled Holy Mountain, and then they got into a fight, and Alan Klein pulled all of his films, and you couldn't screen them anywhere. They weren't on VHS. So the only way to see them was like on a 6th, 7th generation VHS. It was completely unwatchable, and subtitles were illegible, if there even were subtitles. So I came to this film from that idea, and I kind of, in a way, I kind of approached the Dune aspect almost like he did. Like I didn't read the book until I was on the plane, flying to shoot with him for the first time. Maybe I didn't want to jinx it by reading it too soon, but I kind of just tried to be, as much as him. Like, yes, let's make the film, let's sign the dotted line, and then I'll read the book. So that's how I came from it. And now, I guess now the film is done. Now I can finally go watch Lynch's version.
I'm afraid we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask you before we finished, what Jodorowsky's thoughts are on your film.
He saw it for the first. He was interestingly very hands off. You know, when he makes a movie, he just wants the producer to give him the money, and he wants to have the freedom to do his work. And I didn't know if he was going to be the same way towards me, or if he was going to try and control it, because this is a very personal story to him. And who am I coming in to try and tell the story? But interestingly, for all these years, he was very hands off. He really just let us do our thing. He never bothered us, you know, let me see this, let me see that, I want to see a rough cut, nothing like that. So the first time he really saw the film was at Cannes. And so, you know, it was at one of the screenings there, and I was sitting in the theater, and his wife was next to me, and then he was in the third seat. And so we watched the film, and, you know, towards the end, I could kind of out of the corner of my eye, I could see him and his wife were wiping away tears. Because I can only imagine what an incredible, overwhelming experience it must have been to, you know, to see such an important story of your life up on the big screen, to see your artwork, your imagination, your ideas brought to life, to see all these people speaking so highly of you, you know, Chris Foss and H.R. Giger, these people that he hasn't seen in years and years, seeing them up on the screen all these years later, talking about him, saying wonderful things about him, I'm sure it was overwhelming. I kind of looked over and I could see him wiping away tears, and made me very happy, which is sick, because I was happy that I made an 80-something-year-old man cry. But you know, then once the credits were over, then I kind of leaned forward and I said, so what did you think? And he just turned to me and said, it's perfect. Like, that's all I could ask. That's all I feel so glad that I made a documentary about a person and this person didn't want to sue me. That happens all too often. So I'm really glad he's very much behind the film, and he loves it. He feels that it represents his story and it represents him very well. So.
And as you rightly should, it's a great film. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Frank Herbert.